You don't wake up one day and suddenly become powerful, confident, and unrecognizable. That version of you is not built in a moment, it is built in decisions. Quiet, invisible decisions that no one applauds. Most people are obsessed with outcomes. They chase success, status, validation, but they miss the deeper truth. Outcomes are a byproduct of identity. The real question is not what you want to achieve, it's who you are becoming in the process, because every action you take is shaping that person, whether you realize it or not. Every time you choose discipline over comfort, you are casting a vote for a stronger identity. Every time you choose distraction, you reinforce the weaker version of yourself. And over time, those votes compound into something undeniable. There is a version of you that already exists in your mind, a version that wakes up early without hesitation, that keeps promises, that doesn't need motivation to act. But that version is not waiting for the right moment, it is waiting for alignment. Alignment between what you say you want and what you actually do. And that gap, that space between intention and action, is where most people lose their power. They say they want change, but their habits tell a different story. They dream about transformation, but they protect their comfort like it's something valuable, when in reality it's the very thing holding them back. Becoming someone new requires letting go of who you used to be, and that is not easy, because familiarity feels safe, even when it's limiting. You've built patterns, routines, ways of thinking that have defined you for years, but just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's right. Growth demands disruption. It asks you to challenge your own beliefs, to question your own excuses, to step into a version of yourself that feels uncomfortable at first. And that discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong, it's a signal that something is changing. The truth is, powerful people are not born different. They simply make different choices, consistently, especially when it's hard. They don't wait to feel ready, they act in spite of doubt. They don't negotiate with excuses, they operate from standards. And those standards come from a clear understanding of who they are becoming. When you are clear on that, decisions become easier. You don't waste time debating whether to act or not, because the answer is already decided by the identity you are building. You have to start seeing yourself not as who you are today, but as who you are in the process of becoming. That shift changes everything. It changes how you speak, how you think, how you carry yourself. It changes what you tolerate and what you reject, because the future version of you has no room for the habits that are keeping you stuck right now. And if you truly want to become unrecognizable, you have to start acting like that person before you feel like that person. This is where most people hesitate. They wait for confidence before they act. But confidence is not the starting point, it's the result. It is built through evidence, through repeated action, through proving to yourself that you can do what you said you would do. And that proof doesn't come from big dramatic moments. It comes from small, consistent choices that stack up over time. So every single day you are faced with a question, not spoken out loud, but present in every decision you make. Are you choosing the version of yourself that moves you forward, or the one that keeps you exactly where you are? Clarity is not just a nice idea, it is a force multiplier. It is the difference between movement and momentum. Most people are moving, they are busy, they are trying, they are doing something every day. But movement without clarity leads to frustration, because effort alone does not guarantee progress. You can work hard and still feel stuck if you don't know exactly where you're going, and that's where power is lost. Not in lack of talent, not in lack of opportunity, but in lack of direction. When your mind is unclear, your actions become scattered. You start something, then stop. You chase one goal, then switch to another. You feel busy, but deep down you know you're not getting closer to anything meaningful. Clarity changes that. It simplifies everything. It removes the noise and replaces it with focus. When you are clear about what you want and why it matters, your energy stops leaking into distractions. Decisions become faster because you're no longer debating every option. You don't need to ask what you should do next, because your direction has already decided that for you. And that's where power begins to build. Not from doing more, but from doing what matters consistently. Most people avoid clarity because it requires honesty. Real clarity forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about where you are and where you're going. It asks you to define what success actually means to you, not what looks good to others. It asks you to remove the illusions, the vague goals, the empty ambitions that sound impressive but lack substance, because vague goals create weak actions. If your target is unclear, your effort will always be diluted. But when your target is precise, your effort becomes sharp, it becomes intentional. And intentional action is what creates real results. There's a reason why some people seem unstoppable. It's not because they have more time or more resources. It's because they have fewer internal conflicts. They are not constantly questioning themselves or second-guessing their path. They have decided what matters, and they commit to it fully. That decision eliminates hesitation. And when hesitation disappears, execution improves. You stop overthinking and start doing. You stop waiting for the perfect moment and start using the moment you already have. Clarity also protects you. It acts as a filter for everything in your life. Opportunities, distractions, relationships, habits, everything gets measured against your direction. If it doesn't align, it doesn't deserve your time. And that kind of discipline is what separates those who drift from those who lead. Because without clarity, you are easily influenced. You follow trends, you react to circumstances, you allow other people's priorities to shape your life. But with clarity, you take control. You decide what matters and you protect it with intention. The challenge is that clarity is not something you find once and keep forever. It is something you refine continuously. As you grow, your perspective changes. What mattered before may not matter now, and that's not failure, that's evolution. But the key is to stay engaged in that process, to keep asking yourself the hard questions, to keep aligning your actions with your purpose, because the moment you stop seeking clarity is the moment you start drifting again. Power is not about doing everything. It is about doing the right things with full commitment. And you cannot do the right things if you don't know what they are. That's why clarity comes first, before discipline, before consistency, before growth. Because once you are clear, everything else becomes easier. Your focus sharpens, your confidence grows, your actions become more deliberate. And over time, that clarity transforms into something visible, something undeniable, something that shows in the way you move, the way you speak, the way you show up every single day. And every day you delay defining your direction, you stay one step further away from the life you keep telling yourself you want. Discipline is often misunderstood. People hear the word and immediately think of restriction, pressure, something heavy that takes away freedom. They imagine rules, routines, and sacrifice as a kind of burden they have to carry. But that perception is exactly what keeps them stuck. Because the truth is, discipline is not what limits your life, it is what unlocks it. It is not a cage, it is a key. And the moment you begin to see it that way, everything starts to shift. Most people live in cycles. They start strong, full of motivation, full of energy, convinced that this time will be different. But when motivation fades, as it always does, so does their consistency. They fall back into old habits, old patterns, and then they wonder why nothing changes. It feels like a lack of willpower, but it's not. It's a lack of structure. It's the absence of something solid to rely on when emotions fluctuate. And that is where discipline comes in. Not as punishment, but as stability. Not as force, but as a foundation. Discipline is what carries you when you don't feel like moving. It removes the need to negotiate with yourself every single day. Because without discipline, every action becomes a decision, and every decision becomes a debate. Should I wake up early or sleep in? Should I work or scroll? Should I push forward or take it easy? And those small debates drain your energy. They create hesitation. They slow you down. But when you build discipline, those decisions are already made. You don't waste time arguing with yourself. You act. And that action builds momentum. Freedom is often defined as the ability to do whatever you want, whenever you want. But that kind of freedom is temporary, and it often leads to long-term frustration. Because when you follow every impulse, you lose control. You become reactive instead of intentional. You chase comfort in the moment, but you pay for it later with regret. Real freedom is different. Real freedom is the ability to choose what matters most, even when it's difficult. It is the power to stay aligned with your goals, regardless of how you feel in the moment. Discipline gives you that power. It allows you to build a life that is not dependent on mood or circumstance. It creates consistency, and consistency creates trust. Not just trust from others, but trust in yourself. When you know that you will do what you said you would do, everything changes. Your confidence grows not because you feel strong, but because you have evidence. You have proof that you can rely on yourself. And that kind of confidence is unshakable because it is built on action, not emotion. There is also a quiet strength and discipline that most people overlook. It is not loud, it does not seek attention, it does not need validation. It shows up early, it does the work, it stays consistent when no one is watching. And over time, that quiet effort creates visible results. It builds a version of you that is steady, focused, and resilient. A version that does not break under pressure because it has been trained to endure. The hardest part about discipline is not the action itself, it is the decision to begin. It is choosing long-term growth over short-term comfort. It is accepting that there will be days when it feels difficult, when progress seems slow, when results are not immediate. But those are the moments that matter most, because discipline is not tested when things are easy. It is proven when things are hard, and the more you lean into it, the more you realize that it is not taking anything away from you. It is giving you something far more valuable. Control over your time, control over your habits, control over your direction. It removes chaos and replaces it with clarity. It replaces inconsistency with structure. And slowly, almost quietly, it transforms the way you live, the way you think, the way you show up every single day. Because in the end, the person who has the most freedom is not the one who avoids discipline, but the one who embraces it completely. Discomfort has a reputation problem. Most people see it as something to avoid, something that signals danger, something that should be escaped as quickly as possible. From a young age, we are conditioned to seek ease, to find what feels good, to stay within the boundaries of what is familiar. And over time, that conditioning becomes a habit. We build lives around comfort, routines that feel safe, choices that don't challenge us too much. But what feels safe is not always what helps us grow. In fact, the very thing we try to avoid is often the doorway to everything we say we want. Growth does not announce itself with ease. It arrives quietly, often disguised as resistance, as uncertainty, as effort that feels heavier than usual. And in those moments, most people interpret that feeling as a sign to stop. They think something is wrong, that maybe they are not ready, not capable, not meant for this path. But what if that discomfort is not a warning, but a signal? A signal that you are stepping beyond who you used to be. A signal that you are stretching your limits. A signal that change is actually happening. There's a difference between pain that harms and discomfort that transforms. One breaks you down, the other builds you up. The challenge is that they can feel similar in the moment. Both are unfamiliar, both require effort, both test your limits, but one leads to stagnation if avoided, and the other leads to growth if embraced. Learning to recognize that difference is where power begins. Because once you stop fearing discomfort, you stop running from the very experiences that shape you into something stronger. Every time you choose to lean into discomfort, you are rewriting your internal narrative. You are telling yourself that you are capable of more than you thought. You are proving that difficulty is not something that controls you, but something you can move through. And that proof matters. It builds resilience, not in theory, but in practice. It teaches you that you can handle pressure, that you can navigate uncertainty, that you can continue even when things feel hard. The problem is not that people lack ambition. Many people want to grow, want to improve, want to become more. The problem is that they are not willing to feel uncomfortable long enough for that growth to take place. They want change, but they want it to feel easy. They want progress, but they want it without resistance. And that expectation creates frustration, because real transformation does not work that way. It demands effort, it demands patience, it demands a willingness to stay in the process, even when it is not enjoyable. Discomfort is also where clarity is formed. When things are easy, you don't question much. You move through routines without thinking deeply about why. But when you are challenged, when you are pushed, when you are forced into situations that test you, you begin to understand yourself on a different level. You see your strengths, your weaknesses, your patterns. You become aware of what needs to change. And that awareness is the foundation of growth. There is also a quiet confidence that comes from embracing discomfort. Not the loud kind that seeks validation, but the steady kind that comes from experience. When you have faced difficult moments and moved through them, you carry that knowledge with you. You know that you can handle more than you once believed. And that knowledge changes how you approach future challenges. You don't avoid them as quickly. You don't doubt yourself as easily. You step forward with a different mindset. The truth is, the version of you that you want to become exists on the other side of discomfort. It is built through challenges that test your patience, your discipline, your mindset. It is shaped by moments when you could have walked away but chose to stay. And each time you make that choice, you move a little closer to that version of yourself. So the next time you feel that resistance, that tension, that urge to step back into what is easy, recognize it for what it is. Not a barrier, but an invitation. An invitation to grow, to evolve, to step into something greater than what you have been. And every time you choose to accept that invitation, you strengthen a part of yourself that comfort could never build. Consistency is not exciting. It doesn't create instant results, it doesn't deliver overnight transformation, and it rarely gets noticed in the moment. That's why most people underestimate it. They look for breakthroughs, for big moments, for something dramatic that changes everything at once. But real change doesn't happen that way. It happens quietly, in repetition, in the things you do when no one is watching. And over time, those small actions begin to stack, to compound, to create something that feels almost unrecognizable. The truth is, you don't become powerful because of what you do once. You become powerful because of what you do consistently. Anyone can have a good day, a productive day, a disciplined day, but one day doesn't define you. What defines you is the pattern, the rhythm of your behavior over time. And that pattern is built through consistency. It is built through showing up again and again, even when it feels ordinary, even when it feels repetitive, even when it feels like nothing is changing. Most people quit in that phase, the phase where effort is high but visible results are low. It feels like you're putting in the work without getting anything back. And that creates doubt. You start questioning whether it's worth it, whether it's working, whether you should try something else. But what you don't see is that something is happening beneath the surface. Just because progress is not visible doesn't mean it is not real. Growth often happens internally before it ever shows externally. Consistency is what turns actions into habits, and habits are what shape identity. When you repeat something enough times, it stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like who you are. You are no longer someone trying to be disciplined, you become someone who is disciplined. You are no longer someone trying to improve, you become someone who improves naturally. And that shift is powerful because once something becomes part of your identity, it requires less energy to maintain. There's also a level of trust that comes with consistency, not just from others, but within yourself. When you show up daily, when you follow through on what you said you would do, you build a relationship with yourself based on reliability. You stop making promises you don't keep. You stop relying on motivation. You create a standard, and that standard becomes your baseline. It becomes the expectation you hold for yourself, regardless of how you feel on any given day. The challenge is that consistency requires patience. It requires you to commit without immediate reward. It asks you to believe in the process before you see the outcome. And that is difficult in a world that celebrates quick results and instant gratification. But the people who become truly unrecognizable are the ones who are willing to stay in that process longer than others. They don't get distracted by how slow it feels. They don't abandon the path just because it's not exciting. They understand that the power of consistency lies in its ability to compound over time. Each day may feel small on its own. One workout, one focused hour, one disciplined decision. It doesn't seem like much, but when those days are repeated, when they are stacked without interruption, they begin to create momentum. And that momentum builds strength, skill, confidence. It changes the way you think, the way you act, the way you carry yourself. Slowly at first, and then all at once, it becomes visible. What makes consistency so powerful is that it is available to anyone. It does not require talent. It does not depend on luck. It does not ask for perfect conditions. It only asks for commitment. The willingness to keep going even when it feels boring, even when it feels difficult, even when it feels like no one notices. Because in the end, the results are not created in the moments of intensity. They are created in the moments of repetition. And one day, without realizing exactly when it happened, you look back and see the difference. Not just in what you have achieved, but in who you have become. The habits, the mindset, the discipline, the confidence, all built through consistency, all formed through daily action, all leading to a version of you that feels completely different from the one who started. And the only thing that separated that version from the one before it was the decision to keep showing up when it would have been easier to stope energy, is the most overlooked asset in your life. People talk about time, about money, about opportunities, but very few recognize that none of those things matter if your energy is depleted. You can have all the time in the world, but if you're mentally exhausted, emotionally drained, and constantly distracted, you won't use that time effectively. You can have opportunities in front of you, but without the energy to act on them, they pass you by. Energy is what fuels focus, and focus is what turns intention into results. Most people don't lose their energy in one dramatic moment. They lose it slowly in small leaks throughout the day, in conversations that add no value, in environments that drain more than they give, in habits that feel harmless but quietly consume attention and clarity. Scrolling without purpose, overthinking situations that don't deserve that level of attention, saying yes to things that don't align with who you are trying to become. These moments seem insignificant on their own, but together they create a pattern of depletion. And over time, that depletion becomes your normal state. Protecting your energy starts with awareness. You have to recognize what is fueling you and what is draining you. Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Some people leave you feeling focused, others leave you feeling scattered. Some activities sharpen your mind, others cloud it. And once you become aware of those patterns, you have a choice. You can continue allowing those drains to exist, or you can start setting boundaries that protect your capacity to perform at your best. Boundaries are often misunderstood. They are not about shutting people out or creating distance for the sake of it. They are about creating space for what matters. Every time you say yes to something that does not align with your direction, you are saying no to something that does. And that trade-off is not always obvious in the moment, but it becomes clear over time. The more you allow distractions into your life, the less energy you have for meaningful work. The more you tolerate negativity, the harder it becomes to stay focused and positive. There is also a discipline in what you consume. Not just food, but information. the content you watch, the conversations you engage in, the thoughts you allow to stay in your mind, all of it shapes your energy. If you constantly expose yourself to negativity, to comparison, to noise, your mind becomes cluttered. And a cluttered mind cannot focus, it cannot create, it cannot move forward with clarity. But when you are intentional about what you allow in, your mind becomes sharper, your thoughts become clearer, your actions become more aligned. Protecting your energy also means learning to rest without guilt. Not the kind of rest that comes from avoidance, but the kind that comes from recovery. There is a difference between escaping your responsibilities and recharging so you can return stronger. If you are constantly pushing without allowing yourself to recover, your performance will eventually decline. But if you build a rhythm that includes both effort and recovery, your energy becomes sustainable. And sustainable energy leads to consistent results. The strongest individuals are not the ones who do the most, they are the ones who manage their energy the best. They know when to push and when to pause. They know what deserves their attention and what does not. They are selective, not because they are limited, but because they understand the value of their focus. They don't spread themselves thin trying to do everything. They concentrate their energy on what matters most, and that concentration creates impact. When you start protecting your energy, you begin to notice a shift. Your focus improves, your decisions become clearer. You feel less overwhelmed because you are no longer carrying unnecessary weight. And with that clarity comes confidence. Not the kind that is loud, but the kind that is steady. The kind that comes from knowing that you are in control of what you allow into your life and what you choose to keep out. Because in the end, your results are not just a reflection of what you do, but of how well you manage the energy behind what you do. And every moment you choose to protect that energy, you are investing in a version of yourself that operates with greater focus, greater intention, and far greater power.